I've been working at a well-known pizza chain as a delivery driver for a while now. I'm a 23-year-old trans guy, but at the time, I hadn't started taking my hormones and still looked fairly feminine. One night while at work, I was assigned a delivery to an infamously sketchy trailer park on the outskirts of our delivery area. It was late at night, and I had never been there before, but the city I deliver in is fairly high-end and has a low crime rate, so I wasn't particularly worried. After grabbing the order and driving for about 15 minutes, I made it to the opening of the park. Upon entering, I had to shine my flashlights on the trailers as I drove to see the trailer numbers. I finally got to the right one, and when my light illuminated the front porch, I jumped a little when I saw a group of men sitting in the dark. They looked stiff and expressionless. I was weirded out, but not weirded out enough to risk a good tip. I got out of the car and walked up to the trailer and did my usual greeting. They took one of the two pizzas and then looked around at each other for a second before one of them said in a thick accent, "Oh, the other one goes to trailer 17. I was confused. I didn't remember hearing that they had mentioned a second trailer for the second pizza, but before I could say anything, a young boy popped up behind the group and said, "Here, I'll show you," and ran in front of me with a huge grin on his face. Normally this would be kind of cute if I wasn't so weirded out about the whole situation. He started walking ahead of me and motioned for me to follow. Red flags started going off, and I quickly asked them to wait for a moment. I called my boss at the store and asked her if they had mentioned anything about a second trailer. "No," she said. "They just mentioned they have one." I asked her if I should follow the boy to a new trailer, and she said, "Absolutely not. Hand off the second pizza and ask them to specify next time." My boss is a hard ass, but she makes the safety of her employees a top priority. I explained this to the group of men who had still hardly moved from their spots, and they started to look irritated. They said a few words in another language to each other, and then begrudgingly took the second pizza. I walked back to my car as fast as I possibly could without showing them how unnerved I was. The entire time I could feel them watching my every move. I was driving out the back entrance of the trailer park when I saw the last trailer number, 16. There was no trailer 17 that I saw, but behind the last trailer was a dark green van with the engine running and windows tinted almost black. There was one man visible, and he was in the driver's seat. I wanted to vomit when I saw that, and I just prayed that maybe it belonged to the people in the other trailer, but the way the man watched me leave, I don't think it did. And after all of that, I only received a $1 tip.
Back when I was in high school in the mid-90s, I was fond of taking late-night walks on the weekends and during the summer. I usually started them at around midnight and they wrapped up at about 2 or 3 a.m. I lived in a fairly populated suburb of Detroit and near several major roads, so it was nice to get out that late and see the city in a more peaceful, less noisy state. And no, in spite of the incredibly late hour, I never had any run-ins with any crazies or anything like that. The place I lived was very safe. The route I walked took me past the dorms of a major local technical college and some local network broadcast studios. One night I was having a fairly uneventful walk. Some clouds had blown in while I was out walking, but there wasn't any rain, so I wasn't concerned. I reached the stretch of the walk that took me past the dorms, and I started to hear a strange sound. It sounded almost like a popping or finger snapping. I would have written it off as nothing, but it happened again a few moments later. I looked around the parking lot around the dorm, but there was nobody there. It being summer and all, I'll confess, I got a little worried. So I kept walking, but I kept trying to zero in on the source of this strange snapping sound. After a few minutes, I was closer to the large radio tower just beyond the dorms. The sound was getting closer. That's when I spotted it. A little blue flicker of light jumped between two metal buckles on one of the steel mirroring cables. The snapping sound was actually an electrical spark passing between the couplings. It was a strange sight, but in all honesty, I'd never really stopped to scrutinize these things with the radio tower. I stood there for a second trying to remember if it had always been this way, or wondering if there might be something wrong with the wiring. As I stood there, I heard another snapping sound. This one was a little more distant, further up the cable. A spark jumped between two other steel couplings. I was beginning to wonder if this just always happened with radio towers, and that's when it all happened. A rapid wave of sparks between the couplings worked their way up from the ground level to the top of the tower, and when they reached the top, the sky lit up like daylight and I heard a sound like a deafening explosion. Up above, the biggest lightning bolt I'd ever seen arced overhead and came down past the tree line. I stood there absolutely dumbfounded for a good 5 minutes. That had been a ridiculously close call, and I learned later just how close a call it was. Those sparks working their way up the cables, that was the formation of a lightning streamer, and there's really no reason at all other than dumb luck that I didn't get caught up in that. With the size of that bolt, I would have been incinerated on the spot.
This story did not happen to me, but to my aunt and uncle in the early months of 2016. My entire family is what you would call low risk. We have incredibly boring lives, and nothing exciting or strange ever happens to us, which is what makes this incident so out of the ordinary. My aunt, uncle, and their 3-year-old son live in a fairly rural part of Colorado. There were plenty of neighbors, but because the community is smack in the middle of the forest, you'd never guess how close the neighbors are because of the trees. One morning in February, my aunt and uncle are enjoying an average Saturday when someone starts pounding furiously on their door. Already, this is raising red flags with my aunt, because while they had plenty of neighbors, everyone keeps to themselves and wants to be left alone. Cautiously, she opens the door. There is a woman on their porch, and she asks to use the phone to call the police because her husband is sick. Now, my aunt is not stupid, and isn't about to let this strange woman in her house, so she hands her the phone through the door. The woman, however, doesn't call the police. I'm not even sure she took the phone from my aunt. She just stood there. Obviously, my aunt starts getting even more bad vibes at this point, which was only made worse when the woman asks to come inside and sleep because she is cold. My aunt says no, and starts asking the woman questions, such as why she wanted to call the police but she wouldn't use the phone, where she lived, and stuff like that. At this point, the woman says that she may have accidentally killed her husband. My uncle, who had been doing the dishes this entire time, hears the woman say this and nopes the hell out, drying his hands and getting to his room to get his gun. As he leaves the kitchen and disappears into his room, the woman starts freaking out, demanding to know where he was going, asking what's wrong, and throwing a mini tantrum. I'm not sure exactly what transpired after that, but I know my uncle called the cops, and they came and took the woman away. Apparently they'd had prior calls about her, and told my aunt and uncle that she lived about a mile from their house, was on some sort of antipsychotic drugs that she refused to take, and was a well-known drug user. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Right after this incident, my uncle set up a motion sensor outside of their house, much to the relief of my aunt, who was pretty shaken up about the whole thing, though she would never admit it. What can I say? Despite having boring lives, my family is tough as nails when it comes down to it. A couple of weeks later, at about 2 in the morning, their dog, a cattle dog named Sammy Davis, started freaking out. My uncle was about to tell him to shut up when the motion sensor started going off as well. Being in the middle of the woods, my uncle thought that perhaps a deer or even a bear had wandered up to the house. But when he walked into the living room and looked out the window, he saw someone walk along the side of their house and enter their unlocked garage. Naturally, he goes into complete attack mode. He's not letting whoever this person is hurt his wife or his child. He yells for my aunt to call the cops and charges into the garage to confront the person. I should mention that for whatever reason, he neglected to grab his gun this time. A stupid move in my opinion. He bursts into the garage with all the raw ferocity of a pissed off mama bear, only to find the woman from several weeks before, only now she is so high that she couldn't even get the garage door closed behind her. My uncle starts flipping his shit, cursing her out and asking her why the hell she's in his house. Of course, she's so high that she can't understand the word he's saying. Thankfully, the cops showed up a minute later before either of them could get violent. It turns out, she tested positive for a high level of meth and had apparently decided to wander a mile down the road to crash at my aunt and uncle's house. I don't think they ever found out if she actually killed her husband, or if she even had a husband. I hope she's been put into a mental institution, or at least somewhere that she won't be able to be around my family anymore, and somewhere she can get the proper help she needs. Not just because she's an unpredictable drug addict terror that needs professional help, but because if she comes back around again, I'm sure my uncle won't forget his gun this time, and won't hesitate to shoot if he or his family feels threatened. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate if you left a like, shared it with your friends, and subscribed for future content. I want to give a really big thank you to Joey's Nightmares for teaming up with me on this collaboration. He was one of those smaller channels I was referring to in my live stream that I said messaged me, and I never responded for months just to check out his channel and see if he took it seriously. I had been keeping an eye on his channel and he's been doing great work, and he has great quality. I would highly recommend that any of you looking for extra horror content go over and check out some of his videos and subscribe so you can stay up to date on his channel. I also wanted to let all the winners of my giveaway know that I've sent you all messages with your tracking numbers, so go check your method of contact to get your tracking number and see where your prizes are. And one last thing I wanted to hit on before I end this video is that I have a poll going on Twitter that's about to end, and in that poll I asked if some people would like to hear my favorite stories that I've told so far. I have over 140 stories in my red folder, and I was going to go through and re-record them and do a monster compilation for you all. So I've decided to include a poll on this video as well, so if you look up in the upper right hand corner and click that card, or click the I button if it's already disappeared, you can participate in the poll and let me know if you are interested in that. I hope you all have an awesome day, and I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.